On the table was a divorce paper. "I'm gonna divorce you and live with her. We're selling the house and car, so you guys gotta leave." Tom looked crestfallen and blurted out, "I didn't mean it like that." I didn't know what to do and lost all expression on my face. After saying that, Tom stood up and left. "Does your company allow affairs?" When Luke said, "How about it?" and prompted for an answer, one of them cleared his throat and began to speak as if he had come back to his senses. The one who answered appeared to be the oldest among the interviewers. "There have been no affairs here so far, but such infidelity should never be tolerated. We impose strict penalties." Luke then explained to the interviewer that his father, who had cheated on his mother and abandoned her, worked there and was currently having an affair in the workplace. "My name is Sally Oliver. I'm 46 years old. A single mother, working while living with my son, Luke. I got divorced 20 years ago, right after giving birth, and became a single mother. I started dating Tom in college when we were in the same club. When we became professionals, we were both busy and I broke up with him once to date another guy. But, no matter who I dated, I kept comparing them to Tom and it never lasted. Then, Tom contacted me, and we met again after a long time. He seemed more relaxed in his job and looked very dependable, with an air of maturity. Despite the long absence, we clicked just like old times. Tom's stubborn and assertive nature, once a bad habit, now seemed manly, and I fell for him all over again. We resumed our relationship and quickly got married. I got pregnant and gave birth to Luke in less than 6 months of marriage. Things moved fast from reunion to childbirth, but Tom's attitude was a concern. He started coming home late when my morning sickness got worse. Initially, he was caring, but gradually began to treat me poorly. Even when I couldn't stand the smell of oil, Tom insisted on fried food, and I often had to cook it while holding back nausea. When I was lying down, Tom, saying pregnancy isn't an illness, didn't allow any slack in household chores. Of course, he never helped. At this time, Tom had become a manager. Tom often boasted, "Becoming a department manager at this age is a first for the company." Even though I felt lonely, I was thankful that Tom's job allowed us to live without financial struggles. But I couldn't shake off the loneliness and wished Tom would finish work earlier. Almost single-handedly, I managed the household chores and somehow gave birth to Luke. Incredibly, Tom wasn't present during the pregnancy. This led to people at the clinic mistaking me for a single mother. After the birth, my mother came to help around the house, but she had to return in 2 weeks due to my father's poor health back home. Tom's attitude remained unchanged after the birth, and I continued to juggle childcare and housework all by myself. One night, as usual, I went to bed but awoke to find Tom standing by the bed. Drunk, with a flushed face and a sharp gaze, he stared at me. As soon as he noticed I was awake, he left the room. Feeling uneasy about Tom's ominous presence, I cautiously got up. Luke was sleeping soundly next to me. Tom couldn't handle Luke's night crying. He always complained when awakened by Luke's cries. I quietly got up, trying not to provoke Tom, and headed to the living room. There, I saw Tom's large bag he uses for business trips. I thought he was preparing for a sudden trip. Tom said, "I'm leaving." I misunderstood, thinking he meant for a business trip. "Where is the trip to?" Tom glared at me intensely. "No. I mean, we're getting a divorce." I couldn't comprehend Tom's words. What was he talking about? He mentioned divorce. Who's getting divorced? I was unable to react at all to Tom. He sighed in resignation at my unresponsive state and said, "I'm leaving," then grabbed his bag and headed to the entrance. As if responding to his words, Luke's crying echoed from the bedroom. I felt sorry for Luke, but I couldn't tend to him right now. I grabbed Tom's arm to stop him. I was scared of being abandoned by Tom. He looked at me with disgust and violently shook off my arm. "Don't get in my way." I collapsed in the hallway, too weak to stand up. Tom muttered without turning back, "The baby's crying is too loud," and left the house. I called Tom's cell phone several times and sent emails, but there was no reply. A few days later, Tom returned. I thought maybe we could go back to being a family. I greeted him with a smile, but Tom sat down in the living room chair with a sullen face. Holding Luke, I sat opposite Tom. As I was about to speak, Tom took out a piece of paper from his bag. Seeing it, my heart almost stopped. I can't say I didn't imagine it. But being confronted with the reality made my body tremble. I gripped Luke tighter, causing him to fuss. On the table was a divorce paper. I'm gonna divorce you and live with her. We're selling the house and car, so you guys gotta leave. Tom declared coldly. I was at a loss, expressionless. After saying that, Tom stood up. I didn't want Tom to leave like this. I thought if I let him go now, I might never see him again, so I stood in the hallway, blocking his way. Tom clicked his tongue and pushed past me. Don't go! I'll change whatever you want. I was desperate to keep Tom. At that moment, I would have done anything to keep him at home. I was in a state of panic. I must have been completely controlled by Tom, both emotionally and physically. The thought of Tom leaving was terrifying. Don't go! I cried out in near hysteria. Luke, startled, began to cry loudly. Enough! I'd rather be with her than you two. It's divorce, that's it. Tom's loud voice startled me, and I involuntarily stepped back. Stop interfering! Tom pushed me away, the same way he did before, while I was still holding Luke. I fell in the hallway, protecting Luke. Luke's crying grew louder. Seeing him cry, I was relieved he was alive. Tom looked shocked at first seeing us fall, but then he started walking. After putting on his shoes at the entrance, Tom coldly said, "Sign the papers and get out of the house," and left. Realizing I was abandoned by Tom, Luke and I cried together. Tom's words, "Get out of the house," kept spinning in my head. This house was a single-family home with a yard, bought when I found out I was pregnant. It was Tom who fulfilled my dream of owning a house with a yard. I had cooked Tom's favorite meals, did the laundry, and cleaned every corner of this house. I had dreams of raising Luke here, maybe even turning it into a multi-generational home in the future. But all those dreams burst like a bubble. I called Tom's cell phone numerous times, but there was no reply, and since the house was in Tom's name, I had no choice but to give up. So, I signed the divorce papers and decided to move back to my parents' house. At that time, my mind was so consumed with being abandoned by Tom, I couldn't think of anything else. I didn't even ask Tom for child support or alimony. Life at my parents' house was tough. My father was frail and sickly, and my mother was working as an insurance agent to make ends meet. I too had to work various jobs to survive. Grocery stores, night security guard, delivery, traffic control, any job that paid well, regardless of day or night. We were struggling to survive. I know my busy schedule must have made Luke feel lonely too. Luke's entry into elementary school must have made him emotionally unstable. He didn't want to go to school anymore. Being from a single-parent home and wearing the same clothes all the time seemed to be the reasons he was teased by classmates. Luke never told me any of this, but I heard it from his teacher. When I heard about it, I felt so sorry for Luke, who did nothing wrong, and I couldn't stop crying. The teacher introduced me to a child in a similar situation. I started to share experiences and vent with that child's parent, and I made my first mom friend. Luke also became friends with him and started socializing. Having even one friend made Luke start going to school and brightened up at home. Luke was smart and did well in school, and his elementary school teacher suggested taking the entrance exam for a private middle school, but we couldn't afford it. Sometimes, I'd cry alone at night, wishing Tom was there to help. My father passed away just as Luke was graduating from elementary school. He spent his last years in the hospital and we couldn't see him much, but he passed away peacefully. I tried to contact Tom, but there was no reply. Now, it was just my mother, Luke, and me. Luke thrived in public middle school, making more friends and enjoying school. He balanced basketball, studies, and was among the top students. When Luke was in 8th grade, His teacher recommended a private high school affiliated with a university, but I couldn't afford the tuition. I tried to ask Tom for child support and tuition, but I couldn't reach him. When I went to our old house, there was a new one built there. Seeing the new house, I decided to give up on Tom. I couldn't rely on him anymore. And I resolved to be an independent adult. Luckily, Luke was self-sufficient and at school during the day. I started studying in my free time to get some job qualifications. I love learning and didn't mind the hard work. Luke is probably trying not to burden me as well. He was diligent in school, active in clubs and committees, and improved his grades. Thankfully, he was admitted to a renowned public high school with a scholarship. His childhood best friend also got into the same high school, and we celebrated together as single mother families. Once, Luke asked me, "Aren't we getting any money from Dad?" I didn't go into details, but I told Luke that I couldn't contact Tom and that he was living with another woman. As I spoke, Luke clenched his fists and tears filled his eyes. After I finished talking, only the sound of Luke sniffling echoed in the living room. Since hearing this, Luke became even more focused on his studies. He was in a basketball team at high school, but he often spent his weekends at home, eating meals with my mother and me. Luke never said it, but he must have felt lonely. He cared for my mother and me, always finding reasons to stay by our side. Luke was enjoying his high school life, doing well in his studies. His teacher recommended college, but honestly, we couldn't afford it. I struggled with how to tell Luke this. I worked day and night, fitting in study time for my certification whenever I could. In the fall of his senior year, Luke announced he wouldn't go to college but to a vocational school instead. I had been working hard, cutting back on expenses, but years of overworking had taken a toll on my health. I probably couldn't continue the intense labor I was used to. My mother was also aging and couldn't work as before. Luke's decision was a lifeline in these gloomy times. He must have understood our financial situation well. He wanted to study law at the vocational school and aimed to become a paralegal. Indeed, Luke could probably pass the difficult exams. He said he'd work part-time and take care of his tuition. I gave Luke the money I had saved from working so hard. It wasn't much, but better than nothing. It looked like Luke wouldn't have to immerse himself in part-time work. My mother passed away just as Luke was about to graduate high school. My mother, who went through a lot of trouble because of me and worried about me until the very end. She believed in me unconditionally and always wished for my happiness. I was so heartbroken I felt like losing the will to live, almost succumbing to a life of just crying. But I had Luke. His life was just beginning. I couldn't break down now. Besides, my mother had said she was leaving the rest to Luke. My mother seemed to have told Luke something before she passed away, but he didn't share it with me. It was nagging at the back of my mind. Now it was just Luke and me, and I desperately wanted him to be happy. After graduating high school, Luke started attending a vocational school and got busy with studies and part-time work. Then, I noticed a change in him. He stopped speaking ill of Tom. Until then, he often complained about Tom not paying child support or alimony. I thought he was just too busy with studies and work, but it was something else. When Luke turned 20, I splurged on sushi and we ate together. After we finished, Luke brought an old envelope from his room. I wondered what it was, and to my surprise, it was a private investigator's report. The investigation into Tom's infidelity had been compiled. I was shocked and stared intently at Luke. I was puzzled but then remembered my mother's words, "I'm leaving the rest to Luke." This was given to me by Grandma. She told me to look at it when I turned 20. So, my mother had hired the detective. I had tried not to think about Tom, but our current life was a result of his actions. I decided to read the documents from the beginning. As I read, I became increasingly unable to forgive Tom. Memories came flooding back, and I started crying. According to the report, Tom had been cheating since we were together. The other woman was 6 years younger than me. They met through work. She had no family, and Tom started dating her under the pretense of taking care of her. As my morning sickness worsened and I became more bedridden, he saw her more often. I guess I became a burden to him. Why would she, having no family herself and knowing the importance of family, destroy someone else's? I couldn't comprehend it. Then, more photos surfaced. Tom and the woman walking arm in arm. Pictures of her pregnant, with Tom's hand on her belly. He was so averse when I was pregnant. What was all this about? To anyone unaware, the photos would look like a happy couple eagerly awaiting the birth of their child. But knowing the truth, my anger at Tom's infidelity, which I had tried to ignore, was now boiling over. It was like a volcano on the brink of eruption. I wanted to bring both of them down to hell, but I managed to restrain myself. Would it be right to show Luke such a vengeful side of me? It might make him sad. It's been nearly 20 years since I divorced. The child in those photos must be about Luke's age now. I can't forgive Tom and his mistress, but if I acted on my current feelings of revenge, that child would suffer just like Luke. I need to think carefully about what's best for Luke and that child. A few days later, Luke surprised me with some unexpected news. He had found Tom's current address and visited it. Like me, he couldn't sit still and took action. Luke went to the apartment listed in the investigation report. It was a long shot since it was 20 years ago, and they might not live there anymore. As expected, there was a different name on the door plate. Luke felt a mix of disappointment and relief that Tom wasn't there. When Luke tried ringing the intercom of the adjacent apartment, there was no response. There was no response from the room on the other side either, and as I gave up and stepped outside the property, I saw an old woman sweeping in front of a well-aged house. Luke asked her if she knew where Tom had moved to. She told him that Tom's family had moved to this neighborhood. When they first moved in, a middle-aged couple had come looking for Tom, getting into a heated argument with him. She couldn't understand the whole conversation, but heard words like daughter, child support, and alimony. Hearing this, I realized it must have been my parents. They had tried to make Tom reflect on his actions and demanded child support and alimony on my behalf. I had no idea. Thinking of my parents, I felt like crying but managed to hold back. All I do is cry. It's no wonder I always worried my parents. I need to be stronger. I gathered myself and encouraged Luke to continue his story. The elderly lady said that Tom and his family moved shortly after my parents' visit, but since it was nearby, she remembered well. Luke immediately went to the address she provided. Sure enough, Tom's name was on the door plate. Moreover, the names of the 3 family members were on the nameplate. It seemed like they were proudly displaying their family of 3. Luke took a good look at the house. It had a garden, parking space, a net that seemed for golf, and a basketball goal. Compared to other houses in the area, it was quite a large and luxurious single-family home. While Luke was observing the house from a nearby park, a boy about his age came out of the house. The boy was about to ride a bicycle when the front door opened, and a woman who seemed to be his mother appeared. It was unmistakably the woman from the photos. A magnificent house, a happy-looking mother, a boy dressed in branded clothes. Seeing all this, Luke felt an indescribable anger and clenched his fist tightly. I couldn't stand it. You always worked so hard without any time for makeup or fashion. But that woman was wearing makeup and stylish clothes. Luke said, looking upset and downcast. It's okay. I have you, Luke. Luke, I reassured him. Luke nodded shyly. He left still holding on to his anger. It's no wonder Luke was angry. After all, Tom had built a happy family with his mistress, without paying us any alimony or child support. And then, Luke took an action that surprised me even more. He went to the detective agency. He had requested another investigation into Tom's conduct. I was worried about the cost, but Luke used a little money my mother had set aside. The agency, considering it a follow-up investigation, agreed to do it at a reduced rate. With the investigation results in hand, Luke went to Tom's house. I was amazed at Luke's initiative. He was nothing like me, always moping around. Luke waited until Tom and his child left before ringing the doorbell. A voice from inside said, "Yes," and the door opened. Luke expected someone to answer the intercom, but instead, the door suddenly opened, and there was Kelly, Tom's mistress. "Who are you?" Kelly asked without any suspicion, smiling. Luke was taken aback by her smile but managed to remember what he needed to do and handed her the investigation report. Kelly looked puzzled as she took it. "You and your family have put us through hell. You have no idea how much we've suffered. My mom hasn't even had the time to properly do her hair, let alone wear makeup. How could you do something like this?" Luke confronted her with all the anger he had been holding back. Kelly was taken aback by Luke's intensity and seemed to have no idea what he was talking about. Perhaps moved by the sight of Luke's tearful and desperate plea, Kelly invited him into the house. Luke later told me, "She probably felt sorry for me, with tears in my eyes." Once inside, Luke first explained to Kelly that he had conducted a background check through a detective agency and found out where they lived. He then detailed how Tom had cheated on me during my pregnancy, how we received no alimony or child support, and how we had been living a hard life. Kelly listened silently until the end. I thought Luke had somehow come to terms with it, but I was completely mistaken. The story so far was just the beginning. A week after this confrontation, Luke announced he was going to an interview for an internship at a law firm. He was about to graduate from vocational school. He had narrowly missed passing the paralegal exam. And he decided to work in a legal field while aiming for the qualification. Luke didn't tell me where he was interviewing. At that time, I had a strange premonition. The law firm he applied to was a major one, with many applicants, but Luke had made it through the document screening to the interview. Luke said with a smile, "It's all thanks to my serious attitude in class and actively submitting assignments." Little did I know, all of this was part of Luke's plan. Luke returned from the interview. I couldn't shake my uneasy feeling since the day he passed the document screening, so I immediately sat him down at the dining table to hear about it. "So, how did it go? Did the interview go well?" Luke grinned confidently. "Yeah, I was a bit late, but it went well. A big success." After gulping down the iced tea I served, Luke began to tell me what happened during the interview. I was completely astonished, forgetting even to breathe. Luke's interview involved 3 interviewers, but he was the only interviewee. Despite Luke being late for the interview, his resume and application documents were well received, and the interviewers had a positive impression of him from the beginning, despite it being the final interview. Luke believed that if he didn't give any strange answers at this moment, he would pass the interview. Since the questions were all in the manual, I answered them smoothly. Luke felt a sense of accomplishment. I had mistakenly thought that Luke had simply finished his interview without incident. The interview had gone smoothly, with the interviewers occasionally smiling, and was about to end. But the atmosphere changed drastically when Luke asked a shocking question at the customary "any questions?" moment. At this point, Luke asks the interviewer an extraordinary question. "Is adultery acceptable in your company?" The interviewers, baffled by this question, fell silent. When Luke said, "How about it?" and prompted for an answer, one of them cleared his throat and began to speak as if he had come back to his senses. The one who answered appeared to be the oldest among the interviewers. "There has been no case of adultery here, but such acts of infidelity are absolutely not tolerated and are met with severe penalties." I responded with a smile, "Thank you," when I heard this answer. Then another interviewer asked, "Why would you ask such a question?" So I explained. Luke explained to me with a clear and relieved face. Luke then told the interviewers that his father, who had abandoned his mother through infidelity, worked at their company and was currently having an affair in the workplace. Indeed, as I had suspected, Luke was attending an interview at Tom's office. When Luke finished explaining, another interviewer suddenly stood up, slamming his hand on the table. He had turned pale since Luke's last question. He was furious, shouting, "Is this some kind of joke? This is outrageous and disrespectful." Luke remained unfazed by the angry outburst. Please don't yell just because I hit the nail on the head, Dad. At the word dad, the other interviewers reacted. They all were turning to look at the angry interviewer. Yes, this interviewer was indeed Luke's father and my ex-husband, Tom. Luke had known about Tom's office through the detective's investigation. He thought he might encounter Tom at the interview, given Tom's involvement in HR. Luke had exposed Tom's infidelity right there during the interview. According to Luke, it would have been fine even if the interviewer wasn't Tom. Luke's main goal was to expose Tom's infidelity. I didn't want to call him Dad, but I thought it would be more effective. Luke said, sipping his barley tea with a composed look. He had hoped to tarnish Tom's reputation. However, Tom's presence at the interview and his subsequent outburst only dug his own grave. Tom didn't recognize Luke until the very end. Contrasting with Tom's trembling anger, Luke calmly attacked him. You cheated on Mom and abandoned her. And now, you're having an affair with a young woman in the office. Tom stood there, fists clenched, but was pushed back into his chair by the older interviewer. Luke knew from the detective's additional investigation that Tom was still cheating within the office. I was astonished to hear this. How could he still be cheating with another woman? Beyond anger, I was just appalled. The audacity to have an affair with a coworker was just too selfish. Luke showed me photos of Tom walking happily with a young female employee. He had presented these photos to the other interviewers. With such evidence, Tom had no way to deny it. But still, Tom maintained a high-handed attitude towards Luke. Are you trying to harass me? Don't think you can get away with this. When Luke heard this, he thought, who's really at fault here? Tom kept attacking Luke verbally, saying, don't talk nonsense. Luke responded calmly and composedly. It's the truth. I wanted to ask how a company that appoints a person who commits adultery to a responsible position thinks about this matter. I felt a bit frightened of my own son. It's terrifying to have an interviewer become the target in an interview. Luke's calm demeanor made Tom's furious reaction seem even more villainous. The other two interviewers seemed to look at Tom with disapproval. Luke had to suppress his laughter seeing their faces. He then stood up and showed the detective's report to the other interviewers. They took it hesitantly. I expect a proper response, Luke said before leaving the interview room. From inside, he could hear voices scolding Tom, what in the world is this, and what have you done? But Luke's story didn't end there. He soon went back to the interview room. I remembered that Kelly said she would be here today. Hearing this, Tom was speechless, his jaw dropping in shock. Luke told Kelly about Tom's current affair, and she was furious. Luke said he had never seen someone so angry. Kelly was all fired up about giving Tom a piece of her mind. With this, Tom had no escape. Ignoring Tom, who was still in shock, Luke left the room again. The angry voices continued inside. Luke had intentionally been late to the interview to ensure it would be the last one of the day, anticipating this chaos. Though it might have been the worst interview under normal circumstances, Luke felt satisfied for getting back at Tom and told me so. Coming here was solely for revenge against Tom, so failing the internship was within Luke's expectations. As Luke confidently walked towards the exit in the lobby, he heard footsteps running up behind him. Turning around, he saw an enraged Tom. Tom, driven by anger, lunged at Luke. Luke managed to dodge but fell, landing on his backside. Tom grabbed Luke by the collar, yelling furiously with a menacing look. Tom spat, what have you done? If it weren't for you. Luke braced himself for a hit. At that moment, Tom was restrained from behind by what seemed to be his boss. Stop it, this is disgraceful. Such voices could be heard. Then Kelly appeared at the main entrance. She coldly confronted Tom, who was still being restrained. What are you doing to Luke? And what's this about an affair? Without waiting for a response, Kelly slapped Tom. You lied to me, saying you were single. Tom was stunned by the sudden turn of events. His cheek was reddening. Don't joke with me. Snapped back to reality by Kelly's loud voice, Tom began to make excuses. Well, this is, not what it seems. As the unexpected chaos unfolded, the people in the lobby surrounded Luke and the others, watching their every move. Kelly yelled loudly, pulling Tom back to reality as she began hitting him with her bag. Luke told me, that was when I realized what a real mess looks like. Apparently, Kelly had no idea Tom was married. He had pretended to be single when courting Kelly, despite being married to me. Tom really was the worst kind of man. When Luke told Kelly about this, she burst into tears and apologized profusely. I'm sorry, even though I didn't know. I will make amends for this. I'm truly sorry, Kelly said earnestly, tears streaming down her face. Luke informed Kelly about Tom's affair with another young female employee. This was a fact he learned from the additional investigation by the detective agency. He had planned this revenge after discovering Tom's second affair. Originally, he intended to confront Tom with the report and force him to admit his guilt, but then decided that wouldn't be enough. He intentionally failed the paralegal exam and applied for the internship. Even if Tom hadn't been involved in human resources, it would have been possible to expose this fact during the interview. So he thought that this way, Tom could face social consequences. Fortunately, Tom was involved in HR and ended up being an interviewer, making the revenge even more effective. After the chaos, security guards arrived, and Tom was taken away while still being restrained. Kelly, declaring she would demand alimony and sue Tom's workplace for damages, left indignantly. Stunned, Luke was approached by one of the interviewers. He apologized for Tom's behavior and promised, "We will investigate thoroughly and take appropriate action." This interviewer was apparently Tom's direct superior in the company's executive team. Hearing this story, I was overwhelmed with tears. I was so touched that Luke had done all this for me. Thank you. Luke, slightly embarrassed, blushed and sipped his barley tea. After the commotion, Tom ended up being relegated to handling paperwork in the General Affairs Department but was eventually fired for his misconduct. Tom's boss told me, if he had worked properly, he might have become a co-owner of the company. The woman Tom had an affair with lost her place in the company due to the scandal and was forced to resign. Kelly sued Tom for alimony and child support, and they officially divorced. Moreover, Kelly even claimed alimony and child support for me. I was about to give up, thinking it had been 20 years, but Luke told me that claims from 20 years ago were still valid. Since my parents had initiated them during the divorce, I realized I had been supported all along by my mother, father, and Luke. Reflecting on this felt deeply moving. Tom's reputation suffered in the industry after the scandal, and he couldn't continue in the same line of work. He's now working any job he can find, day and night. Unaccustomed to such work, he's become haggard and gaunt, looking much older. His boss shared this with me. He has a lot of payments to make to both you and Kelly. Yes, Tom has a lot of debts to repay through work. When things finally settled, I met with Kelly. She sincerely apologized to me. I had no ill feelings towards her. We were both betrayed by Tom. Kelly turned out to be a gentle and kind person. I couldn't help smiling, thinking how scary she must have been when angry. I felt we could become good friends. My studies paid off, and I acquired several qualifications. Now, I work from home using these qualifications. Luke passed his exams and seems to be thriving at a major firm. He mentioned there's a woman he wants to introduce to me soon. I'm now pondering what dishes to prepare for her visit. To worry about such things. I'm amazed at how happy my life is now.